All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors this morning. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, the last day of Iyar. Yonah and Shoshi Ehrenfeld for dedicating all of his Sherman Drushos this month in memory of their grandfather Yosef ben Shmuel Aaron, Benjamin and Ali Swall of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating Shurim this month in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah and the families a Nechama. Also, with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. We're supposed to finish the parak and Eretz Hashem begin the new parak. So we are picking up, today's daf is Pei Dalet 84. And we are picking up Eretz Hashem on Pei Gimel Amud Beis 83b, the last line. Amrav Nachar Bar Yitzchak, Af Anan Nami Tanina. Despite the encouragement by David Schwartz, I wasn't able to get to the finish line yesterday for the daf. Sorry. All right, okay, so but Eretz Hashem, we're going to make it to the finish. You know what? Better late to the finish line than never. So I remember again in yesterday's daf, the end of yesterday's shir, we spoke about the idea that as much as we have seen a dramatic opinion that an androgynous is treated like a zachar, we've pointed out that the concept of androgynous being a zachar doesn't apply in all areas of halacha. So, for example, you could hold that an androgynous human being is considered to be a zachar, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the fact that you would hold an androgynous in other situations in halacha is considered to be like a male. So one of the examples we gave to that was with the halachos concerning karbanos. So the Gemara goes, right, Amar Nachar Bar Yitzchak, Af Anan Nami Tanina. We also learned this concept that an androgynous is not considered to be a zachar. Let's say, for example, when it comes to sacrificial law. For example, the Gemara says, Af Anan Nami Tanina Rabbi Eliezer Omer, top of Pei Dalid, Hakilayim, Utreifa, Viyotze Doven. So I will say these are all different types of situations. Kilayim means an animal that's a mixed breed, an animal that is bred from two different other animals. Treifa, an animal that has a terminal condition from which it would die from within a year. Yotze Doven, an animal born cesarean section. Tumtum, va'androgynous. Lo kiddushin v'lo makadshin. So we'll see what those terms mean in just a moment. I will say, but the point over here you see is that halacha l'maisa, you cannot use a tumtum, an androgynous animal, for sacrificial purposes. So you see over here that at least in this area of halacha, of sacrificial law, tumtum is not considered to be a zachar. It's not considered to be male. What does it mean, lo makadshim, lo kiddushin v'lo makadshin? B'amar Shmuel, lo kiddushin b'tmura, v'lo makadshin ba'osei tmura. So I will say what it means is like this. We know the halachos of Tmura says as follows. If you have a consecrated animal and you exchange it for another animal, there is a penalty. What's the penalty? V'hayahu usmura so kodesh la'Hashem. Both animals are considered to be consecrated. So the Gemara says, but if the animal is an androgynous, number one, it can't make a Tmura and it can't become a Tmura, which makes sense. At the end of the day, if the animal itself is incapable of ultimately accepting or acquiring sacrificial sanctity, then by definition, it can't make a temura and it can't become a temura. So for example, if you were to consecrate an androgynous animal and then you were to swap out the androgynous animal for another animal, the second animal wouldn't be kodesh, right? So in other words, androgynous can't generate temura. Similarly, if you had a consecrated animal and you wanted to swap that animal for an androgynous animal, the swap would be halachically irrelevant. Nothing would happen. Again, let's say the Gemara just highlighting the idea that even if you accept the idea that androgynous is a zachar, let's say again when it comes to human beings, doesn't automatically mean that androgynous would be a zachar in other areas of halacha. Beautiful. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, chayavin alav skilu ki zachar. So Rabbi Eliezer says that if a man has relations with an androgynous, that is mishkav zachar, right? That is considered to be mishkav zachar, and therefore again it's punishable by skila. So the Gemara says, Tanya, remember again, our entire Mishnah really focusing on the opinion that androgynous is considered to be like zachar. The way we paskin about say is really that androgynous is suffix. And in fact, again, really androgynous is beria b'fnei atzma. It's almost like its own entity. But we don't paskin that it's a zachar. So the Gemara says, Tanya Amar Rebbe. Rebbe says as follows: Kishalachti l'ilmod Torah eitzal Rebbe Lazar ben Shamua. Let's listen to this. So Rebbe says, when I went to learn Torah by Rebbe Lazar ben Shamua, Chavru alav talmidov ketarnagolim shal beis bukya. The talmidim in the beis medrash ganged up on me like the roosters of beis bukya. Everyone knows about the roosters of beis bukya. What's the pshat there? Look at Rashi. Shal beis bukya bikiyim v'charifim ve'in manichim tarnagol nachri b'neihem. So apparently in beis bukya, the roosters were very territorial. Right, and if you tried to go ahead and encroach on their territory, they would fight you off. So Rabbi says, I came to the Beis Medrash of Elazar ben Shamua, and I tried to find my place there in the Beis Medrash. And what happened? The other Talmidim would not let me speak up. They literally would not let, Rashi says over here, Bekiyim, the Talmidim of Elazar ben Shamua's Beis Medrash were Bekiyim, were erudites, right? They were very scholarly. The Charithim, they were sharp. Ve'ein manichin tarnagol nachri b'neihem, and they would not let someone who they did not know, kind of say something, speak up. So Rabbi says, like, I come to the Beis Medrash, and they're fighting me. So the Gemara says, "V'lo hinichuni lilmod ela davar echad b'mishnasinu." I'm sorry, "Ve'lo hinichuni lilmod ela davar echad." And the truth is, when I was there, I was really only able to learn one thing. What was the one thing? Mishnasenu, Rabbi Eliezer Omer androgynous chayavin alav kizachar. That was interesting. So ultimately, Rabbi says in the Beis Medrash of Elazar ben Shamua, it was a very sharp and very, very difficult atmosphere there, and I was only able to learn one thing. Namely, Rabbi Elazar holds an androgynous is like a zachar, and therefore, if a man has relations with an androgynous, ultimately, one is chayiv skila. Hadron aloch harabosai mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. Ninth parak of Maseches Yevamos. Here we go. I will say a little bit back to Yevamos now. So the Mishnah says as follows: Yesh mutaros laba'alein v'asuros liyameim. So we'll say the Gemara is going to go ahead now and give a whole bunch of different categories. So there are certain women who are mutar to their husbands and asur to their yavam. Or sometimes mutaros liyameim v'asuros laba'alein. Some women who are mutar to their yavam, but ultimately asur to their husband. And then there's a third case of mutaros li elu uli elu. And then we'll say there's a third case of women who are mutaros both to their husbands and to the yavam. So we'll say three cases. Some women mutar to their husband, asher to the yavam. Some women asher to the husband, mutar to the yavam. And some women mutaros to both. And of course the fourth category, va'asuros, va'asuros laba'alein, mutaros li elu, va'asuros li elu. And then there's the fourth category of women who are asuros both to their husband as well as to their yavam. Good. Rabbi will say, let's go through the list. Here we go. Ve'elu mutaros laba'alein v'asuros li'yimeihem. So we'll say, what's the example? What's the category of women who are mutar to their husband? Mutar to their husband, but asur to their yavam. What's an example of this? Here we go. Kohen hedyot shenasa salmana v'yesh lo ach kohen gadol. So Rabbi will say, here's an interesting case. A kohen who married an almana, and he has a brother who's the Kohen Gadol. So Rabbi says, so now watch this. Remember again, Kohen marrying an almana, mutter aser, mutter, Kohen, regular Kohen marrying an almana, mutter. So Rabbi say, so here the woman is muteres to her husband, but now if her husband were to die without children, the surviving brother is the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol can't marry an almana. So this is a case of being mutter to the husband, aser to the yavam, or chalal shenasa kshera v'yesh lo ach kasher. Or about another case, chalal. Remember again, we'll say chalal is a product of a forbidden kohanic union. So let's say a kohen marries a grusha, they have a child. That child is called a chalal. So we'll say here's the case: chalal marries a bas Yisrael. Mutter aser, mutter. Chalal can marry a bas Yisrael. So right, and then what happens? This chalal, however, happens to have a brother who is a kasher kohen. Now, I'll say again, so if Chalal dies, could the brother do Yibum? And the answer is no, because remember again, once a Chalal has relations with a woman, he makes her a Chalala. And once she becomes a Chalala, she is not permitted to marry a Kohen. So once again, another case, Muteris to the husband, prohibited to the Yavam. One more. Yisrael, for V'yesh Akasha, good. V'Yisrael Shenasa Bas Yisrael, V'yesh Ach Mamzer. The boss, here's another case. A Yisrael marries the Israelis, right? Totally fine, right? It's a mutter marriage, but the Yisrael has a brother who's a mamzer. Because also remember again, Yibum applies to which type of brothers? Right, paternal brothers. So remember again, you could be a regular guy who has a mamzer brother, right? It's your brother from your father. So the Maisa again, this is a case where she is muteres to the husband, asura to the yavam. Good. Mamzer shenasa mamzeres. Or about another case, mamzer marries a mamzeres, muter aser, mamzer can marry mamzeres. V'yeshlo ach Yisrael, and he has the mamzer has a regular Yisrael brother. So the marriage is mutter, but if the husband dies without children, yibum would be aser. Yibum would be prohibited in these situations. So these are all cases of mutaros laba'alein v'asuros li'imeh. So I'll say this is category number one: women who are mutter to their husband, prohibited to their yavam. Beautiful. Next, ve'elu mutaros li'imeh v'asuros laba'alein. What's the interesting case? Category two are women who are permitted to the prohibited to their husbands, but permitted to the yavam. Okay, we're going to have a case like this. Here we go. Kohen gadol shekidish almana v'yesh lo ach kohen hedjot. What's that case one, for example? Kohen gadol does kiddushin with an almana. Kiddushin with an almana. Both say mutter aser, right? And now what happens? He dies without children, and he leaves behind a brother who's a regular kohen. So Rabbi say, is an almana permitted to a regular kohen? The answer is yes. So this is a case where she is asura to her husband, but interestingly enough, muteres to her yavam. Good. Kasher shenasa chalala v'yesh lo ach chala. Both say case number two, right? A kasher marries a chalala. So Rabbi says, remember again, in this case, kasher in this case means a kasher kohen, right? A regular kohen marries a chalala, aser. Right, Asr, Kohen can't marry a Chalala, so the marriage is Asr, but this Kohen happens to have a brother who's a Chalal. So now if Kohen dies, leaves his widow is Asr to, right, so the wife was Asr to her husband, but she's permitted to the Chalal brother, or Yisrael Shenasa Mamzer. So we'll say first wide line, right, Yisrael marries Mamzeres, we'll say Asr. Yisrael's not permitted to marry Mamzeres, V'yesh lo ach Mamzer. But if you were to die without children, ultimately she falls to Yibum, to the mamzer brother. So we'll say once again, permitted to the Yavam, prohibited to the husband. Mamzer shenasa bas Yisrael, or a mamzer marries a bas Yisrael, aser, v'yesh lo ach Yisrael. But he has a Yisrael brother. So we'll say in all of these cases, mutaros liyimehen va'asuros leba'aleh. So we'll say in all of these cases, halacha l'maisa, the woman is mutter to the yavam, asr to. So we'll say fascinating. So this is category number two. So in category number one, cases of mutter to the husband, asr to the yavam, which is we'll say how we started this masechta, right? Category number two is asura to the husband, muteres to the yavam. Good. Next category, ve'elu asuros li'elu uli'elu. We'll say third category now are women who are prohibited both to the yavam, as well as, or I should say, both to the husband as well as to the yavam. But so what are these cases? Kohen gadol shenasas halmana v'yesh lo ach kohen gadol. Oh, it's interesting. So let's listen to this. A kohen gadol, third wide line in the Mishnah. A kohen gadol marries an almana, aser, right? Aser. Now what happens? And his brother is also the kohen gadol. So you say to yourself, how can you have two kohanim gedolim? So you can have it, remember again, if you have a Kohen Gadol, right, who becomes Tameh, so what happens? There always has to be an acting Kohen Gadol. So you have a skan, right, a backup, right? Let's say the skan now becomes Kohen Gadol. So it's like, technically speaking, the Kohen Gadol who's serving is the Kohen Gadol, but the Kohen Gadol who's Tameh is also the Kohen Gadol. So you could have two Kohanim Gedolim at one point in time. It could happen. I will say, in this case, they also happen to be what? They also happen to be brothers. So now, I'll say, watch this. You have a Kohen Gadol who married an almana, aser, and his brother is also Kohen Gadol. So this would be a case where she would be asura both to the husband as well as to the yavam. Next. Kohen Hedyot kasher shenasa chalala. I will say again, you have a Kohen Hedyot, regular Kohen Hedyot, who married a chalala, aser, v'yesh lo ach kasher. And he has a brother who's also a kasher Kohen. Rabbi say in this case, she's asura to the husband and asura to the yavam. Yisrael shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach Yisrael. Or Yisrael marries mamzeres, aser, and he has a brother who's also regularly Yisrael. She's asur to both of them. Or mamzer shenasa bas Yisrael, or I will say a mamzer marries a bas Yisrael, v'yeshlo ach mamzer, and he has a brother who's a mamzer. She's asur to the husband and asur to the yavam. The Gemara says asuros li'elu u'li'elu. So we'll say this is category number 3 of where a woman is asura both to the husband as well as we'll say. By the way, I just want to point out Mishnah totally straightforward. Totally straightforward. There was no tricks over, no complicated cases. Just I will say, it's interesting why the Mishnah feels the need to spell out all of these cases, because the truth is they're very obvious. The one interesting idea that the Mishnah is conveying, I will say, is once again a rejection of the position of Rabbi Akiva. Because remember again, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Akiva holds Ein Kiddushin Tofsin Bechai Ve'lavin. Right? Rabbi Akiva holds Kiddushin doesn't take effect in a situation of a prohibited marriage, even if it's only prohibited by a lav. I will say these are all cases. I mean, some of them are asays, but a lot of them are lavim. But you see, the marriage still works. So that is one point that's being conveyed. We'll see in the Gemara. Next, Ushar Kol Anoshim Mutaros LeBalein UliYimeim. And I will say all other women, all other cases will be cases where the women are mutaros to their husband and to the yavam. Okay. Shnia midivrei sofrim. So both say, so now we have our 4 categories. Category number 1, mutaros to the husband, asura to the yavam. Category 2, asura to the husband, mutaros to the yavam. Category 3, asuros li'elu, asur to both the husband and the yavam. Category 4, mutar to both the husband and the yavam. I will say the Mishnah doesn't go through that last category because essentially why? If you don't fit into one of the first 3, then by definition you're in category 4. Good. Says the Gemara, Shnios midivrei sofrim. Shnios midivrei sofrim. I will tell you, there's an interesting mussar in these kind of things where essentially what the Mishnah just did, which is quite fascinating, is said that every single marriage fits into one category, right? In other words, there's no such thing as a marriage that doesn't fit into a category. You're either 1, 2, 3, or 4, but everything is grouped somewhere, which I will say is such an incredible mussar, because sometimes in life, we like to think that we could hover like in the area of pariv, right? I want to be pariv, right? I don't want to be milchiks, I don't want to be fleshiks. I'm not going to be a rasha, I'm not going to be a tzaddik. I'm kind of just going to hover somewhere. And the Musar Haskell from a Mishnah like this is, Rabosai, you're always in one category or another. Either you're growing or you're falling. Either you're milchiks or you're fleshiks. Either you're a tzaddik or you're a rasha. There's really no such thing as living in between categories. Now, I could be a tzaddik who has a lot of faults. I could be a rasha who has some positive things. But at any given moment, we are in a category. And it's an incredible yisod, because Rabbi say, we like to say, no labels, no labels. Agree, I'm the biggest proponent for no labels, except for 2, tzaddik or rasha. And I will say, that is the label that all of us must live with, and a category we have to choose. And we have to be honest, in any given moment, what category am I in? Where am I? Am I going up? Am I going down? There's no such thing as remaining stationary in life. And if I think that I'm stationary, chances are if I've categorized myself as someone in a holding pattern, if I'm honest with myself, holding pattern means what? I'm falling. I'm regressing. There's no such thing as standing in place. And I will say that's the most scary. You could take every single marriage that exists in this world, and it has to fit in one of these 4 categories. Because in life, again, we always categorized in one way or another. And that's why it's so important, just from a self-identification perspective, just from a direction of life perspective, to figure out, in this moment, what category do I fit into? So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Shnios medivrei sofrim. So let's say it's an interesting case. Shnios, we had this much earlier on in the Masechta. I will say the case of Shnios is the case of rabbinic erva. Right? So remember again, these are cases that are not asr midoraisa, but Lamai said these are cases of rabbinic erva. So in the cases of shnios midivrei sofrim, shnia lebal v'lo shnia liyavam, asur lebal umutaras liyavam. So we'll say you could have a case of a woman who's a shnia to her husband, so she is rabbinically prohibited to her husband, but yet again not rabbinically prohibited to her yavam. in that case, asur lebal umuteres liyavam. She's asur to her husband, mutter to the yavam, shnia liyavam v'lo shnia lebal. So you could also have the case of a woman who is a shnia to her yavam, but not the shnia to the husband. Asur liyavam muteres lebal. Shnia lezeh ulezeh. Asura lazeh ulazeh. And if she's a shnia to both of them, ultimately, again, she's a surah to both of them. We'll say, we're going to see exactly what the Mishnah is doing over here. What do I need this line for? But on the most basic level, whereas the first four categories we're talking about Isurei D'Oraisa, the Mishnah now is adding in that, by the way, you could create this same construct ultimately with shnios, with rabbinic arayos, with rabbinic prohibitions as well. Good. So as I said, the Gemara, Ein lohem lo ksuva, v'lo peros, v'lo mozonos, v'lo bulaos, v'avlad kasha. So Rabbi is saying, this is going to get very it's all been interesting. This is where it gets even more interesting. Rabbi will say, if a man marries a woman who is a shnia, right, who is a shnia, right, so a man marries a woman who is a rabbinic erva. So there are ramifications of this. Number one, ein la lo ksuva. We'll say, so there's a number of ramifications. Number one, she doesn't get a ksuva. Right, a wife in a rabbinically prohibited marriage doesn't get a ksuva. And I will say, this is fascinating. And why is it fascinating? Because I will say, it sounds like from this Mishnah, what happens if you married a woman who's an Isur D'Oraisa to you? Does she get a ksuva? Does she get a ksuva? What would you say? Based on the Mishnah. Sounds like yes. In other words, the Mishnah didn't say anything about that. Right? The Mishnah made no statement that a woman who is Asur D'Oraisa doesn't get a ksuva. The first time the Mishnah is mentioning this is by shnios. Right? Which sounds like that it's only in the case of shnios that there's not going to be a ksuva, but perhaps by Isurei D'Oraisa there will be a ksuva, which is like wild. So again, hold on to it. We have a lot of exciting things coming down the pike over here. And look, so number one, she doesn't have ksuva. Number two, v'lo peros. I will say, look at Rashi just a moment. This is actually very interesting. V'lo peros. Ein mishalim la peros nichsei mulog sha'achal mishala v'yaf agav the kamla biksuves tiknu porkana tachas peros nichsei mulog shu'ochal kidisnan lokasav the shab. So I'll say we're not going to get into this right now. This has to do again with the halachos of redeeming one's wife from captivity, which we'll get to in the Gemara a little bit more. But I will say, but for our purposes today, if we have time, I'll go back to it a little bit more. For our purposes for today, what I want to highlight is like this: lo peros means two things. When a woman, remember we had this in Yevamos, there are two different types of property that a woman brings into a marriage, right? Little chazar. What are the two types of property? Nichsei melug, nichsei tzom barzel. What's the difference between them? Nichsei tzom barzel are evaluated at the time of the marriage. Husband guarantees the value. Upon death or divorce, husband or his estate pays the value of the property. Whether they increased or decreased, he's locked in for the value. Nichsei melug, what's the halach nichsei melug? He takes no achrayas over the property. Husband gets peros, rights to use the property, and upon death or divorce, property is returned as is. And by the way, if it's fully used up and there's nothing left, there's nothing left. But lamaisa, property is returned as is. When the Mishnah says lo peros, what that really means is as follows. When a man marries a woman who's a shnia to him, number one, he doesn't really get the right of peros. That's right. But even if he uses it, even if he uses the property, really not, even though he's not entitled to it, he doesn't have to pay her for that illegal usage. That's what it means for peros. So he doesn't get peros, but if he used peros, he's not obligated to pay her for any property or any peros he used over the course of the marriage. For lo mazonos, he's not obligated to support her. Rashi says over here, "V'lo mazonos." Fine. Rashi has a lot of ancillary keys. We're not going to get into now. V'lo belos. They will say belos is very interesting. Belos. Look at Rashi. Imadayin yeshla belos ushchakim min avagadam shech nisalo einonot lasan kishios de kansura banan. Then I will say here's what's interesting. Belos things like this. If a woman brought in property, I will say I'll give you an example. Let's say a woman brought into the marriage a nice warm coat. Nice warm coat. Okay, we'll say, and let's say again, it happens to be it's a man's coat, right? So again, it was her father's, her grandfather's. She brought it into the marriage, right? What is under normal circumstances? What is husband allowed to do with that coat over the course of marriage? He can wear it. So I will say, let's say now they get divorced. 20 years later, they get divorced. So and let's say this is called nichsei malug. What is the husband obligated to do with the coat? Return it. Now I will say, let's say the coat is all worn out, right? It's not in such good condition. That's called belos. right? Any type of worn out property. Husband is still obligated to give back belos. Apparently in the case where the marriage is rabbinically prohibited, husband is not obligated to give back belos. He's not obligated to give back the worn out clothing. Now, Rabosai, what I will point out is when you look at this Mishnah, what's strange about this? It sounds like who is penalized for this marriage? Who's penalized? The woman, which is so strange. There has not been one penalty levied against the man for this marriage. The Gemara is going to address this. We'll discuss this. Seems very one-sided. Vavlad kosher. But interestingly enough, so as much as you have all of these financial penalties in this rabbinically prohibited marriage, the offspring is absolutely kosher. Kofino solotzi, but we force a man to divorce his wife. We'll say, even though again, this is quote unquote only in Isser D'Rabbanan. Amar lekohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza lekohen hedyot, mamzira unesina liyisrael, bas Yisrael. So we'll say these are all prohibited cases, right? A kohen gadol marries an almana, or a grusha, right? Or a grusha and a chalutza to a regular kohen, or a mamzeris and a nesina to a Yisrael, or a bas Yisrael who marries a nesina or a mamzer. Yesh lahen ksuva. We'll say there it is. There it is. Absolutely, unequivocally, overwhelmingly wild, right? So we'll say now this Mishnah just told me in the same breath that anyone who is in a rabbinically prohibited marriage, woman doesn't get a ksuva, and yet the Mishnah then goes through all the list of Isurei D'Oraisa, biblically prohibited marriage, and the Mishnah says unequivocally, these women get a ksuva. How you understand that distinction, we'll see in the Gemara. So we'll say, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. So we'll say, we're going to begin with the first case. So my area, the Tani Nasa, Lisni Kidesh. So we'll say, let's go back for just a moment. Category number one was the category of women who are mutter to their husband and asr to the yavam. So we'll say, what was the first case? Kohen hedyot shenasa es ha'almana. Right, so case number one was a kohen hedyot who married an almana, regular kohen who marries an almana. So we'll say, so again, let's go through the case. And what was the case? His brother was the kohen gadol. So this is a case, marriage is permitted, because a regular kohen is permitted to marry an almana. What's the problem? If he dies without children and she falls to the brother kohen gadol can't marry an almana. The Mishnah Gemara asks an interesting question. Why do you have to say it's a case of a kohen who married an almana? You can make the same case, lisnei kidesh. You can make the same idea, Rabbi say what? That he was mekadesher. He was mekadesher. A kohen was mekadesh an almana, and then he died. Right? You don't even have to go to full-fledged marriage. Once there's kiddushin with an almana, why, Rabbi say? Why? Because Lamais, remember again, she's already an almana. She's already an almana. So once there's kiddushin with the brother, right? Once there's kiddushin with the kohen, even if the kohen dies, right? Because we pass that there's yibum even from kiddushin. Once the brother dies and she falls to the kohen gadol, she can't do yibum, or he can't do yibum, because now she's an almana. I will say, I want to point out, she's already an almana, right? Not an almana from the death of her now kohen husband. Remember, he married an almana. So why do you have to get into a case of nisuin? Just simplify it. It could even be kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, so we'll say maybe the issue is like this. Maybe because once this almana marries the actual kohen, the kohen brother, then maybe there's an asena lo sase for the kohen gadol. The lo sase is he can't marry an almana, and the asay is that he has to marry a besula. Because we'll say maybe we're talking about a woman over here who Lamaisa again was widowed from her first marriage from kiddushin, right? And now if she were to be widowed from her second marriage from kiddushin, she could still be a besula. So maybe if it's a widowhood from kiddushin, maybe all it is it's just a lo saaseh. If she's widowed from nisuin, then she's a widow and she's also not a besula. Aval kidesh asiyaseh v'docha lo saaseh. Chazal say maybe if she's widowed from kiddushin, maybe since it's only a lo saseh, maybe we should say that what? The aseh of yibum should go ahead and trump the lo saseh of almana. The Gemara says, but 1 second, v'hakula pirkin aseh v'lo sasehu v'lo asyaseh v'dachi lo saseh. This goes back to the beginning of the Masechta. That's not true. We've already established. I will say the only lo saseh that yibum is able to trump is which lo saseh? The only lo saseh is Eshesach. right? Marrying your brother's wife. That's the only lo saseh, Rabbi say. Again, that's the great novelty in Yibum. Right, the great novelty in Yibum is that this is a relationship that is biblically prohibited, yet the Torah is saying not only is it mutter, but it's a mitzvah. But that's the only lo saseh that Yibum could trump. Any other lo saseh, by definition, blocks Yibum from occurring. To which the Gemara says, Mishum de kabari lemisni. So we'll say, honestly, we're just trying to figure out why does the Mishnah set up the first case as a Kohen Hedyot who did Nisuin with an Almana, set it up as a case of a Kohen Hedyot who did Kiddushin with an Almana. And you can make the same point. Rather, the Gemara says, Mishum the Kabbalah Misni Seifa, because of us, we have the end of the Mishnah. What's the end of the Mishnah? Kohen Gadol Shenasa Es HaAlmana. We'll say, because the last case of the Mishnah, Seifa in the Mishnah, was a Kohen Gadol who married an Almana. And I will say, in that case, Dafka Nasa the Shavya Chalala. Rabbi, remember again, then if the Kohen Gadol marries an Almana and he has a brother who's also a Kohen Gadol, has a brother who's a regular Kohen, so that's a case of where she's prohibited to the husband and prohibited to the brother. Now, Rabbi says this one only becomes prohibited to the brother who's a regular Kohen. How? After she becomes a Chalala. Rabbi says, how does she become a Chalala? Only through Bia. Only through Bia. So you have to set that up as a case of Nisuin. Avakide Sharyale, because I will say, technically speaking, if you have a Kohen Gadol who did Kiddushin with an Almana, and then the Kohen Gadol dies, and the surviving brother is a Kohen Hedyot, could he do Yibum with this woman? Yeah, the answer is yes, which is fascinating, right? Because why? Because all she is an almana, right? Almana is permitted to a Kohen Hedyot, and she's not the halala, because she only becomes the halala after bia. So therefore, since because I have to set up that case as nisuin, therefore, just for mishnaic symmetry, tanin nami reisha nasa, we also established the first case as a case of nasa. Va'adatani mishum seifa, listening mishum mitziyasa. But I will say, if you want to maintain mishnaic symmetry, why didn't you look at the seifa? Look at the middle case. Kohen gadol shekidish es ha'amana v'yesh lo ach kohen hedyot. I will say, what about the case of the Kohen gadol who was mekadesh the amana and he has a brother who's a Kohen Hedyot? So I will say again, why don't you set that up as a case of nasa as well, or as a case of kiddush as well? So the Gemara says, "Va'adatani mishum seifa listening mishum mitziagar el mishum bas buksa de kaboy lemisni." So let's listen to this. What's bas buksa? Look at Rashi. El mishum bas buksa. Last line in Rashi. Hadatani nasa bereisha de perikin mishum bas buksa kulumar hashnuya b'tzida. The reason we set up the first case as dealing with the case of nisuin is in order to make it symmetrical to the case right next to it. What's the case right next to it? To which the Gemara says, "Al mishum bas buksad the kabayla misni chalal shenasa kshera." Because we'll say the case right after it is the chalal who marries a regular Yisraelis. Now, I will say in that case, and let's say again he has a brother who's a Kohen. That's a case ultimately again where it's permitted to the husband, prohibited to the yavam. But the only way it becomes prohibited to the yavam is how? Taima dinasa the shavi chalala is if there's marriage, i.e. bia, because then she becomes a chalala. Aval kiddush sharyale, but if it was just kiddushin, ultimately should be permitted to the yavam. Mishum hachi katani nasa. Therefore, Rabbi say we set up the first case as nasa. So therefore, Rabbi say halacha lemaisa. All the Gemara is pointing out over here is that the first case in the first category, remember again, first category, women who are permitted to their husband, but usher to the yavam. The first example of that was a Kohen Hedyot who married an almana and has a brother who is the Kohen Gadol. So she's mutter to her husband, asura to the yavam. The Gemara just points out you could have established the same case as what? Where the Kohen Hedyot didn't do nisun but did kiddush. The Gemara says, you're right. But just to preserve symmetry, we made it a case of nisuin. Beautiful. So the Gemara says, Umay yer diktani almana. Why do you set this up as a case of almana? In other words, Rabbosai, if we're dealing now with a case ultimately again where there was nisuin, so why do you have to set it up as a case of a Kohen Hedyot who married an almana? Right? The Gemara says, Lisni besula. Just make it a regular case of besula. And what? When the Kohen dies, right, we'll say again, if a right, listen how the first case is set up. Kohen Hedyot marries an almana, right? He dies. Widow falls before Kohen Gadol for Yibum. So we'll say, so this is a case of where she's muteres to her husband, can't do Yibum. Says the Gemara, I'll make it much simpler. Make it a regular case of marriage. of a Kohen Hedyot who married a Basula. Rabbi say, then what happens? He dies. When he dies, what does his wife become? An almana. And if the almana is falling to her brother-in-law, who's a Kohen Gadol, can he do yibum? No, because the Kohen Gadol is not permitted to marry an almana. So, in other words, you don't have to make it a case of a woman who has a pre-existing condition, right? Of an almana, right? Lamaisa, even if she was a basula, he still can't do yibum with her. What a great kasha. The Gemara says, "My ear, they tell you almana, listen to basula." Amid base. Shabbos is actually quite fascinating. The chitema kasavar haitana nisuin harishonim mapilin. Oh, Rabbi say we actually had this at the beginning of the Masechta. Rabbi say, do you remember this? This had to do with Rabbi say, when is yibum eligibility solidified and concretized? Remember we had this whole machlokas. Rabbi say there are two opinions, right? What are the two opinions? Opinion number one, at the moment of marriage, right? At the actual moment of marriage is when yibum eligibility is solidified and concretized. Second opinion said no. When is yibum eligibility solidified and concretized? At the time of the death of the husband, right? Two different periods. So the Gemara says maybe our Tana holds that yibum eligibility is solidified and concretized at the time of the marriage. Oh, interesting. If that's the case, then what Rabbi was saying, then when a Kohen Hedyot marries a basula, we look at this woman as what? As a basula. And therefore, again, when her Kohen Hedyot husband dies, maybe what? Kohen Gadol brother-in-law should be permitted to go ahead and do yibum. And that's why the Mishnah Dafka has to set it up as a case of where the Kohen Hedyot is marrying an almana. She has the pre-existing condition. We'll say, look at Rashi. Nisuin harishonim shenasa ach shemes mapilin osal yibum ubasar hachi shaita azlinon v'ilav almana me'achar havi shouting the Kohen Gadol. So say incredible. Maybe if you hold, this is so exciting. Maybe if you hold that yibum eligibility is solidified and concretized at the time of the marriage, so if a Kohen is marrying a basula, we forever look at this woman kiviyachal as what? A basula. And therefore, even once her husband dies, Kohen Gadol is permitted to do yibum with her. And that's why it's only because she comes into the marriage with the designation of an almana that he can't do yibum with her. To which the Gemara says, Harechalo shenasa ksheira. It doesn't work. I will say because the case of the chalal who married a kshera, right, which is a permitted marriage, but then we said if the chalal has a brother who's a regular kohen and the chalal dies, surviving brother can't do yibum, which tells you that I do not determine yibum eligibility at the time of the marriage. To which the Gemara says, Havada mishum seifa. The kabbalah the seifa. Once again, I will say it's all about symmetry, right? Because the seifa says, Kohen Gadol shenasa salmana, v'yesh lo ach Kohen Gadol. Shabbos said we need it for the end of the Mishnah. What was the end of the Mishnah? Kohen Gadol marries an almana, and he has a brother who's also a Kohen Gadol, or Kohen Hedyot. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Mishum the kabbalah says seifa. Kohen Gadol shenasa salmana, v'yesh lo ach Kohen Gadol, or Kohen Hedyot, dafka almana, ava basula chazile, mishum hachi katani almana. So I will say once again, just to maintain symmetry between the Reisha and the Seifa, we dafka use the case of almana. Beautiful. So maskif Rapapa. So I'll say now let's go. Let's get a little bit technical for just a few moments. So Rapapa raises the kasha im isalaha dichi asar avdimi am Rabbi Yochanan. I will say so. Rapapa raises the following question. If we subscribe to the following concept of Rav Dimi, then I will say, what did Rav Dimi say? Here we go. We just had this a few days ago. Mitzvi sheni shenasa mitzvah rishona b'na sheni. But remember, we had this discussion about whose identity. In this case of, let's say, we have converts, and the type of converts who are limited in entry for multiple generations. So let's say, for example, mitzvi sheni, man is a second generation mitzvi who marries a mitzvah rishona, first generation mitzvi. Let's remember again, when could mitzvi join the General Assembly of Klal Yisrael? Third generation. So second mitzvah sheni marries a mitzvah rishona, bina sheni. Their offspring is a sheni. So I'll say this Gemara or this statement really following the idea that the offspring follows the identity of the mother. So the mother was Rishona, therefore her son is a Sheni. Shabbos say, now watch this. What the Gemara is asking is as follows. What Rav Papa is asking over here is, there are cases that the Mishnah left off. There are additional cases that you could include. What's an example of an additional case you could include? Here we go. So the Gemara says, listening Nami, Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Shtei Mitzrios. So here we go. Include the following case. A Mitzri Sheni who married two Mitzrios, two Egyptian converts. Achas Rishona v'achas Shnia. One is a Rishona, one is a Shnia. V'hayu lo banim me Rishona Shnia. And I will say he has sons from both of these women. So remember again, the son from the Rishona, right, will be what? A Sheni. And the son from the Shnia will be what? A Shlishi. Now both say a Sheni is permitted to marry who? Either another Sheni or a Rishon, right? A Shlishi is permitted to marry who? A Yisraelis. All right. Well, she can marry, right? She can marry, but could also marry regular Yisraelis. So the Gemara is like this. If both of these sons marry the women they're permitted to marry, mutaros labalein v'asuros liyamein. This would be a case, I'll say, ultimately again, where their wives would be permitted to their husbands, but asuros to their yavam. V'iepoch v'nasav, and I will say, if they don't marry women who they're permitted to marry, then ultimately again, mutaros liyamein v'asuros labaalehen. Ultimately, again, they'd be permitted to their yavam, but also to their husband. Rabbi say, all that's happening here is Rav is coming along and saying we could have included another case in the Mishnah, right? Of a man who marries two Mitzri, right? A Mitzri Sheni who marries two women, one a Rishona, one a Shnia. They each have a son, one son a Shlishi, one son a Sheni. If the sons marry correctly, then it'll be a case of where the woman is permitted to the husband, prohibited to the yavam. And if they marry incorrectly, it's a case of permitted to the yavam, also to the sons. We'll both say, we look at this case and we say to ourselves, I'm so happy this wasn't included in the Mishnah, right? Baruch Hashem. So listen to this. So mutaros li'elu li'elu, what will be the case of mutaros to both? So ultimately, again, gioros, where they married a giores. Asuros li'elu li'elu, what will be the case ultimately where the woman would be ushered to with husband and yavam, islandness. So I'll say, all that's happening over here is coming along Rav Papa and saying, by the way, you read this Mishnah, and you look at this Mishnah as being an all-encompassing Mishnah. All the cases are listed over here. All Rav Papa's coming along to say is not true. Not true. You left off a couple of cases, to which the Gemara says, you're right. Ton of a shear. Yeah, you're absolutely right. By no means does the Mishnah mean to be an exhaustive, all-encompassing list. Right? I will say all the Mishnah means to do is to set out a framework. In order to set out a framework, what do we do? I will say we create 4 categories. And what do we do in the categories? What do we do? We give some examples. Is it all the examples? No. We've left off some cases. To which the Gemara says, really, what other cases did you leave off? To which the Gemara says again, I'm sorry, don't have a shear. My shear, daha shear. So as I say, remember again, if you want to tell me that the Mishnah left off cases, it's not just to say that it left off one example. You have to give me at least more than one example in order to give a legitimate answer that the Mishnah is not all-encompassing. I'll tell you what did it leave off? Petzua Daka. All right, we'll say all roads lead back to Petzua Daka. All right, so we'll say, so you can't get away from this. Let's say, so Lamaisa again, Petzua Daka. We left off the case of Petzua Daka. Now both say, what's the case of Petzua Daka? Look at Rashi. Shir Petzua Daka. Tahavimatse lemisne bekulhu Petzua Daka shanasa Yisraelis. So both say there is a case of a Petzua Daka who marries a Yisraelis. Right? So both say, so here's a case, and let's say he has a regular Yisrael brother. So both say, listen to that. So Petzua Daka marries Yisrael. Supposed to this would be a case of what? Where she's asura to her husband, because the Petzua Daka is not permitted to marry a Yisraelis, but what? She'd be permitted to her husband. So that case is not in the Mishnah. So you see from here that the Mishnah is not striving to be an all-encompassing Mishnah. So we left off the case of Petzua Daka. We also left off the case of Mitzri. No. That's not a good answer. Because I will say, if you're going to give me the case of Petzua Daka, that's not considered to be an omission. Why not? Because I will say, remember again, the Mishnah included the phrase Chayve Lavin. So the Gemara says, Atu Chayve Lavin. Milo katani v'hadar. I'm sorry. So the Mishnah says, "V'adahatani v'chayve lavin." So we'll say, we said chayve lavin. So we'll say, the fact that the Mishnah mentioned chayve lavin includes all chayve lavin. So once you say chayve lavin, you don't have to keep going through each individual case. 1 second. The Gemara says, "Atu chayve lavin, milo katani v'hadar." So the Gemara says, "Milo katani v'hadar tani, v'ha katani, kohen hedyot shenasa amana, v'chalo shenasa kshera." They both say, but that's not fair, because even though the Mishnah said Chayve Lavin, If the Mishnah would have just said chayvei lav and not given examples, fine. But the Mishnah says chayvei lav and still what? Rabbi say still what? Still goes and gives specific examples. If that's the case, why not also mention psuadaka? To which the Gemara says, no. Hahu itzricha leila ashmunin kidrat Yehuda Marav. The Rabbi say these other cases that are mentioned, like the Kohen Hedyot who marries an Amana, the Chalal who marries a Ksheira, right? These cases are needed in accordance to Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Dam Rabbi Yehuda Marav, lo husaru Ksheiros li nase lipsulin. Oh, I will say this is going to be tomorrow. We're going to focus on tomorrow's daf, which is actually quite fascinating. Which is, I will say, according to Rabbi Yehuda's name of Rav, there is no problem. Ksheiros, I will say, in this case means Kohanos, women who come from Kohanic families. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav that there is no problem for a Kohenes to marry a Psula. Others will say, you might have thought that a woman who comes from a Kohanic family should have certain limitations on who she marries. But I will say, Kamash Malon, she does not. She does not. She can marry whoever she wants. V'haraya, Rabbi say again, you have these cases of, for example, a Ksheira who marries a Chalal. So that's what the Mishnah is coming to teach me. So the Gemara says, "Who's Rukshes linase lepsulin? I have hakatani Chalal shenasa Ksheira v'Yisrael shenasa bas Yisrael v'yesh lo ach mamzer." But 1 second, we included in the Mishnah the cases of a Chalal who married a Ksheira, or Yisrael who marries a bas Yisrael and has a brother who's a mamzer. Ha nami lo mahadar misni dashmuinon lav shein shava bakol. I will say these are examples of a lav that does not apply equally to everyone. V'kamash malon lav hashava bekol. V'kamash malon lav hashava bekol. And I will say ultimately, again, it's coming to teach us ultimately about a lav that's applicable to everyone. So the Gemara says, Katani, ha katani yisol shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach Yisrael. What about the case ultimately of a situation of a Yisrael marries a mamzeres, and he has a brother who's a regular Yisrael? Umamzer shenasa mamzeres v'yesh lo ach Yisrael elalav shmamina tana v'shir shmamina. So again, the bottom line to all of this, Rabbi says, just remember, let's take a step back. Rav Papa started this whole conversation, and what was Rav Papa's problem? Rav Papa, what's your problem? Right? What's your problem, Rav Papa? Your problem is Rav Papa says the Mishnah is incomplete. The Mishnah is incomplete, right? You're bringing up four categories, and I want to give, and you give examples in each category, and the Mishnah seems to present itself as a holistic picture. Rav Papa says, not true. I'm going to show you a case that you're missing. What's the case where you're missing? A Mitzvah marries two women. One is a Rishon, one is a Sheni. They has two sons. The sons marry. Again, we'll say quickly: if the sons marry, quote unquote, correctly, halachically, appropriately, that'll be a case. Women who are permitted to their husband, permitted to the Yavam. Marry incorrectly, that'll be a case permitted to the Yavam, asur to the husband. To which the Gemara says, Papa, calm down. Ton of a shear. The Mishnah's case, the Mishnah does not mean to be all-inclusive. All-inclusive. To which the Gemara says, okay, so what else is missing? Petsuadaka. Petsuadaka is included in the statement that says lav. But 1 second, if lav was supposed to be all-encompassing, then don't give other examples of lav. So the Mishnah goes through this whole back and forth. Rabbi say, bottom line conclusion is, the Mishnah is not complete. The Mishnah is not complete. But Rabbi say, it's not a chisaron in the Mishnah. The Mishnah did not set out to be complete, right? The Mishnah just went ahead and set out ultimately again to go ahead and give me a basic picture, but does not mean to encompass every single case. Rabbi say, tomorrow we're going to pick up, Emir Hashem, the beginning of the daf is going to be focused on the statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, namely the ability ultimately of ksheros, kohanos, to go ahead and marry lechatchila, genealogically blemished men. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll say I'll just mention, today's Memorial Day, and it's interesting to note that it's the greater society. So the godless of today, of course, is what? It's a day off from work. But I will say, but it's such an incredibly important day. We are privileged to be citizens of this great country, and while it's true that as Jews, libi b'mizrach. Right, like Rabbi Nachman says, my heart is right, Lim Mizrach, right? But as Rabbi Nachman says, L'chol makom shani holech, ani holech l'Yerushalayim, ani holech l'Eretz Yisrael. Our hearts are always in Eretz Yisrael. One day our bodies will be there as well. But until that time, we're privileged to be citizens of this great country. And it's important to understand that the freedoms we have, they're not just like appear out of nowhere, that there are men and women who give their lives and are willing to risk their lives each and every day to secure our democracy, to secure our freedoms, and the freedoms that often we take for granted come with the highest price. And from the founding of this country, there are those brave men and women who have been willing to pay that price. You know, in Eretz Yisrael, because you see soldiers everywhere, it's easy to go ahead and express your akaras hatov. I think here in America, right, it's rare to see someone in uniform. It's rare to see someone at the airport. Sometimes you'll see someone in uniform. So sometimes, we're out of touch with this, often because Baruch Hashem, our wars are not fought here, right? Our wars, the battles that are fought overseas, often battles that we are never even aware of. But I will say, on a day like today, it's so important. If you know a veteran, right? You know someone who has donned the uniform and has been willing to go ahead and put their life on the line, say thank you. Say thank you. Express your akaras hatov, because the fact that we're able to gather here, learn Daf Yomi together, go ahead and daven together, it's true. Unfortunately, we live in times now where we need security outside. But the ability of religious freedom is one of the most greatest gifts that we have. But that gift comes because people have and are willing to pay the ultimate price. So if you happen to run across someone in uniform, make sure to express your akaras hatov. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to run across someone in uniform, we all know someone who served in the armed forces. We all know someone who is willing to give for this country. Take the time to say thank you. Take the time to say, I enjoy my life in this country and I enjoy my freedoms. I enjoy my liberty here because you were ready and willing to make the sacrifice. Thank you. And in the schus of that akaras hatov, our men and women of the armed forces should have incredible siyata d'shmaya to continue to fight for our liberties, to our freedom, in the battles probably that we'll never know about. They should be successful in all of their endeavors, and Amirat Hashem come back to their families whole and in peace. Yeah.
Dressed up,